James from the Queer Review here.
Oh, I love your background.
I do too.
Very cool.
I do too.
Great.
Sean, if I could start with you, I just wondered what sparked your interest in this subject and why you wanted to make a film about it.
I came across about 15 years ago, about approximately 15 years ago, this great article by Gore Vidal. I don't know if you ever read it. That was in Vanity Fair, where Gore talks about Clarence Tripp's book, The Intimate World of Abraham Lincoln. And so from that, it sparked my imagination. And then I read John Stauffer's, who's sitting next to me, book Giants, who talks about Lincoln and Speed. And then I read, Jonathan Ned Katz, who's kind of the godfather of queer history, his writings about it. And I just started reading more and more. And then I wanted to get to the sources, the actual letters themselves, the accounts that people made. There's tons of people talking about how Lincoln was uncomfortable around the presence of women. Not that he was shy or bashful, but he just didn't really have an interest in hanging out with women, and he was awkward. And I read more and more of this stuff, and I wanted to do a project, but it wasn't until the pandemic that I thought, whenever I talk to someone about this, the queer community knows about this, right? They know about it. But when you talk to other people, they're like, come on, that can't be true. So I thought, I've got to make a documentary to prove this. And that's why I went to great lengths to get the original letters, talk to very top Ivy League scholars in a lot of cases who study this their whole lives to really get the story out there in a medium that is kind of its time, which is filmmaking.
And John and Thomas, how about for each of you, was there something specific that sparked your interest in this subject? And also, I guess playing devil's advocate to a degree, like, why does it matter if Lincoln, had male lovers?
So I would say that, the book on giants, I wrote it because I found that Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln are two of the preeminent men in the United States in the 19th century, and they led strikingly parallel lives that ultimately converged in friendship. And in the process of researching, I became convinced, based on the letters, that Lincoln had carnal relations, especially with Joshua Speed, David Derrickson, others. And it was not uncommon. It was not uncommon because the terms of heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexuality had not been invented, and so there was far more fluidity sexually. And so I relied on the sources and close friends of Lincoln who acknowledged that Lincoln's relationship with Speed was the most intimate, more intimate than anything else, unexceptionally intimate. And so it wasn't a big part of the book, but I wanted to tell the story in the most accurate way that I knew. And what shocked me is that I got a lot of vicious criticism on suggesting that Lincoln was gay. And it really was shocking to me. And I realized that for Lincoln is considered the greatest president, and for a lot of scholars, the idea that the greatest president could be gay because of their prejudice against that form of sexuality was profoundly threatening. And in fact, there's one scholar who told me point blank, if I lose my faith in Lincoln, I lose my faith in the United States as a democracy. And by that, in a sense, he meant that Lincoln is gay. That can be shattering to a lot of people.
I think we see some of that reflected if you read some of the comments on YouTube of the trailer for this documentary, which I don't usually read the comments, but I got sort of a little drawn into them, and it was reflecting some of what you were saying there. Yeah. And Thomas, how about for you?
Well, sounds gay. I'm in. I don't have any hang-ups or baggage on this. As a gay person, this appeals to me. I think that's what I've learned, is that within my profession, as a historian, a professional historian now, but as a person growing up the end of the 20th century into the 21st, this feels natural to me as an interpretation. I don't have any red flags or anything that makes me say, I can't do this. What would this mean? I take the exact opposite approach. This is being honest and truthful. This is being true to the purest form of inquiry that historians are meant to do. I'm not trying to hide, I'm trying to bring to light. And so at the same time, I think the mission is uplifting, because I realize that this would be a way to kind of promote acceptance, to promote a sense of equality that Lincoln himself was one of our great pioneers of, to, in a moment of, frankly, frightening threats and assaults on queer people, to kind of suggest that the fight for civil rights, the fight for democracy is Lincoln's fight. I mean, every time I even think about it, I see a connection, a new one. And I would hope that for young people, especially the queerest generation on earth, Gen Z, that this will be something new, a new icon for them to embrace. I want Lincoln right up there on their own Mount Rushmore of queer icons.
As you were mentioning, Shaun, the film includes letters to and from Lincoln, and there's other contemporary sources as well. And I wondered, like, for each of you, is there one particular bit of evidence that sways your thoughts on the subject? Maybe just going back to you, Shaun.
Well, I mean, it might be like a little insider here, but for me, the scholars have known about Lincoln and Speed for a long time, and they've slept together for 4 years, and they'll write this off constantly as well. Lincoln was broke, and he needed and it's common for men to share beds for economic reasons, but 4 years is unheard of. And Lincoln was a double income earner. He was a lawyer and a legislator. He would not need to stay in that bed for 4 years. But there's a piece of evidence that we pulled out where one of Lincoln's main mentors, William Butler, offered in a letter. You know, we have the piece of evidence that we pulled out of the Brown Library saying, "Hey, you know, old friend, my wife is mending your clothes. I just paid off some of your debts, and I want you to come make my home your home. He's like, come move in with me." And instead of moving with his mentor, who just paid off his debts and his wife is mending his clothes, he moves in with a perfect stranger that he just, you know, meets, who happens to be a beautiful man. And, you know, and you have to ask yourself, really? Why wouldn't you move in with your mentor? You have your own room. And we have this piece of evidence. Instead, move in with this beautiful man that you end up sleeping with for 4 years. And later, Speed describes as, you know, no two men were ever more intimate. That's how he describes his relationship with Speed. Right. And no scholar will argue against that. But somehow in their mind, this 4 years in a bed together did not mean love, did not mean carnal relations, did not mean cuddling or sexuality. It's just baffling. And you have to be blind not to see it.
That's right.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that, John or Thomas, to a particular piece of evidence that you find especially compelling?
Yeah, Shaun was beautiful in what he just said, but there are a number of letters. I mean, Robert Todd Lincoln, Lincoln's son, said the same thing.
Well, don't you teach the letters in your class?
Yes,
that's what I love.
I teach the letters in my class, and I teach a class on Douglas and Lincoln. I teach the letters. And what's interesting is over the past few years, I mean, virtually every student now will say, oh, yeah, Lincoln and Speed were physically intimate. Yes. And I mean, it reflects the evolution. But I mean, I started teaching it when students were much more accepting of different forms of sexuality. And there's a far greater understanding of how understandings of sexuality have evolved. In the 19th century, intimacy meant both not just an emotional, but a physical bond, and it reflected a friendship. It reflected equality, that two intimate friends were equal. They're very good at saying, well, this evidence is completely convincing. And the very fact that my students recognize the convincing aspect of the evidence is very heartening. 20 years ago, it wouldn't have occurred, because 20 years ago, I think there were far more barriers and far more ignorance, frankly, about understandings of sexuality in the 19th century. It was a period of far greater fluidity. It was, for two women to live together as partners, at least in the Boston area, it was called a Boston marriage. No one batted an eye about that.
Yeah, what this film does is it goes back 180 years to a period where Lincoln produced some of his most intimate, his most touching, his most romantic letters of his life. I mean, Lincoln scholars have analyzed through countless books, biographies, and collections everything he ever wrote. Lincoln scholars scrutinize his every word. I mean, he is read more closely than any American has ever been read. And without a doubt, those same scholars, his same profession, we come to the conclusion that Lincoln's letters to Speed are the most intimate, the most emotional letters he ever wrote. So it also is about a judgment of the man throughout his whole lifetime. This is not the soaring language of the Gettysburg Address or the first inaugural or the second inaugural. This is not the kind of statesman on display. This is the inner world, the private life. He's revealing himself. He's bearing his soul. And to just dismiss these as childish or adolescent or simply a kind of friendship that had nothing beyond the emotional, I mean, that's a disservice to the profession. And I think what this film does is it says we have to pay attention to these letters, to this relationship.
I mean, at the end of the day, when you read a love letter, you know it's a love letter.
Yeah.
When you see the language he has between Speed, you feel it.
Yes.
You know, and he did not write like that to anyone else. He did not say yours forever to anyone else.
Nope,
he did not say I'm jealous of you and your new wife,
Yes.
Speed, to anyone else. You feel it. You feel the emotion.
You do. He didn't say that I look for your letter every day. I look for a letter from you every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so romantic. Well, John, Thomas, Shaun, thanks so much.
Okay,
Sure,
yeah.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.